Hey, everybody, welcome to the Deviant Mind. Yes, we're still here. We're still alive. I
Well,
know it's been a couple of weeks now. Happy Halloween.
yeah, everyone's like, were they missing?
It's like, what happened?
What
Did
happened?
somebody get to them? Um, so yeah, anyway, having children on October Halloween just makes everything very difficult here
Very
today
good.
to talk about Scream, the 1996 movie written by Kevin Williamson, directed by the very great Wes Craven.
Yes,
And yeah, when do you remember watching Scream for the first time?
I do. I remember seeing it in the theater when it came out and just being sort of terrified, jump scares. I feel that might be one of the pivotal horror film that like really got the idea and the with how to do jump scares. And Wes Craven's just like a master
Well, you
of
know what
horror.
was interesting, because we both have worked in film.
Yeah,
I didn't actually realize that the idea of the slasher horror film was no
yeah,
longer like I remember Freddy Krueger coming out in the 80s.
yeah,
And I actually didn't watch Halloween until my 20s. So that was like way,
yeah.
past because Halloween came out in 78.
13th and Jason, like that comes
Yeah,
out
that was all
before
80s.
too. That's like in the 80s. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that was in
Yeah,
the 80s. So that
absolutely.
was like the heyday of the slasher film. But by the 90s, schools that hadn't made any money, that it was like a really not, uh, it was like a dead genre that nobody was going to
Yeah,
see.
yeah.
And so the way we came across this was that 1994, so we're 1994, Kevin Williamson, who was the writer of Scream, he was a struggling screenwriter. He had just sold his first script, Killing Mrs. Tingle. He was looking for another project. And so he was house sitting and he was watching a Barbara Walters documentary series called Turning Point about the serial killer Danny Rawling. Now, so he's sitting there at night and all of a sudden he gets really spooked and he goes, I don't know if it was the kitchen or something, and he sees an open window and hadn't realized that that window had been open. And because he was so freaked out about
Mhm,
what the serial killer Danny Rawley did, that
mhm.
he armed himself with a knife
Uh,
and called his friend for support. And the friend, I don't know if he was trying to make fun of him or trying to calm him down, was like,
yeah,
hey, let's talk about really fun horror characters like Freddy Krueger and Jason. In conversation while he was still like, armed himself with a massive knife. And he
he's on the
had,
phone with holding a knife by the
yeah,
window.
right, talking about like Jason and Freddy. And when he
Yeah.
woke up the next morning, he had this like horrifying nightmare. And he
Mm.
was like, oh my gosh, I am going to write kind of an opening home invasion. So he
Yeah.
wrote that in like a couple hours. And then he spent the next 3 days that he wrote the script for Scream. It was originally called Scary Movie. And
Oh,
he did it while listening to the score of Halloween for further inspiration.
wow.
And he developed a lot of the screenplay around a single line of dialogue, which is, quote, movies don't create psychos, quote.
Mm, wow. Did
Which
you see it? Did you see it in theaters when it came out?
um I did no, I didn't, because it was when I was in architecture school and I wasn't sleeping, and so I didn't watch movies or read a
Sure.
book for like 5 years.
Sure.
By the way, listeners, whatever you do, don't go to architecture school. It's just bullshit. Anyway, so
Dare I say that's a good blueprint to remember?
yeah, right. Like, oh my God. Um, so so that is kind of how Scream, and we can talk about Scream a little bit later, about like it really influenced the slasher movies that came. It was one of the most slasher films ever.
To confirm, it's really more so his watching the case of the Gainesville Ripper that inspires him and freaks him out to write something, right?
That is correct.
So what's fantastically odd and bizarre is how one work is inspired by a killer and then the movie comes out and inspires two more killers.
Which is kind of crazy when you think about the quote that he kind of centered his entire screenplay on was, again, movies don't create psychos, movies make psychos more creative. So I think that's kind of interesting because he um, wrote, and you know, there are some similarities between the Gainesville Ripper and Scream because it all is set in a college town.
Yep.
And there's a very short period of time, which we will go over. Um, and you know, it's like a home invasion, right? Killing, which
Yeah.
I mean, I guess most killers do. But then at the same time, like I remember actually that mask was everywhere for the Halloween that came because I think it was put out in the summer. It came out in the
Yeah.
summertime, and I just remember Halloween. There was just all these masks.
The scary mask.
Do you know the story of the mask? Do you know
I
that?
do not. The only thing I thought was that Danny Rolling himself wore it during one of his robberies. Is that true?
Not that I could find.
Okay, yeah. What is the origin?
I don't know. I haven't been able to find that either.
Oh,
I
I
was kind
see.
of curious.
Yeah.
Maybe it was just some completely inspired costume designer. Because Wes Craven actually, you know, again, what I found really
Right.
fascinating, he was not the first choice for the producers um to be directing it.
Interesting.
He had done a Vampire in Brooklyn the year before, and it was a horror comedy, and it did terribly.
Eddie
And
Murphy.
that they were looking at were Danny Boyle of
Oh,
right,
train
Tom,
spotting.
yeah, of Train Spotting, Tom McLaughlin, who I don't know, Sam Raimi, who would have been totally fun,
Oh, wow.
Robert Rodriguez, who thank God
Oh,
no, George A. Romero, of course, like the
oh,
original, and Quentin Tarantino and Anthony
wow.
Waller. So they were all doing that, but they that none of them had ever done a horror satire. A lot of them had done horror or comedy. You know, like Sam
Right.
Raimi is perfect for like a horror comedy.
Yeah.
So is George A. Romero. But well, no, George A. Romero did the original zombie movie,
Night of the Living Dead.
Night of the Living Dead, but he was more like political horror. That wasn't like
Yes.
horror satire. So and he Wes Craven were worried about him as well because he had only directed horrors, he hadn't directed satires, and he was really hoping to do a Haunting of Hill House. But
Oh,
because his other films had done so poorly, they were like, I don't know. And so he's like, okay, give me an offer that he couldn't refuse, which I'm assuming they must have given him like shit money. Dimension did make him an offer. Or maybe he
maybe.
can't refuse. So maybe he made a lot of money. Anyway, I didn't see exactly how much money,
Did
but he
really
did.
well at the box office, I'll tell
Oh,
you that.
oh, it's huge. It's like one of
Huge.
it's a huge turning point in horror films because as I was saying before, horror
Mhm.
films were not doing very well. And
Oh,
here's the other thing. Before Scream, most horror films never had stars. And when they sold, they had Drew Barrymore and Courtney Cox sign on to it. That was like a huge thing because if you
yeah.
think about it, Halloween, Freddy, even Psycho, it was like those movies made them stars, but
Yeah.
they had no stars when they were going into production. Like nobody really knew who Jamie Lee Curtis was before Halloween.
It was mostly unknowns or older actors. Story with Fred Astaire, I think maybe even Burt Lancaster was in it. I feel like a lot of old movie stars started converting to doing like these supernatural horror films. Roddy McDowall comes to mind.
Right. But they weren't at the peak of their celebrity. It's like,
Correct. It was like
they were
it was
just
a good mix of like young, fresh faces and like older established actors. Back,
right.
like Max von Sydow and
Yeah, of course, of course. Yeah. Like somebody like Drew Barrymore or Courtney
totally.
Cox, who was in like major Friends fame at that
David
point.
Arquette.
David Arquette wasn't as well known either. I mean, he was part of the Arquette.
Nev Campbell, Party of Five.
That's true. That's true. But she signed on after Drew Barrymore signed on first.
Oh.
And then she actually was supposed to be the Nev Campbell's part killed because that was also would throw everybody off. And now, of course, there was some rumors saying that she didn't want to do the movie at all. but she didn't want to piss off Bob Weinstein. So she was like, okay, I'll take this smaller part of Casey Becker.
Great role.
Yeah, what was that?
Great role.
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, it does, it's kind of like, like this was the first movie that would do that. It's like, you think she's going to be the main character and she's dead within the first 5 minutes. So
it's almost as though, what was that film with the calls coming from inside the house?
A stranger
going into the phone or something.
A Stranger Calls Twice.
A Stranger Calls. But basically, this opening scene is like,
yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Oh, it's in the house. Uh-oh.
Yeah.
So anyway, so the Scream, obviously we can talk so much more about it, but let's talk about the Gainesville Ripper, who Kevin Williamson was watching one night and got the inspiration for this massive juggernaut. Was born on May 26, 1954, and he was shockingly horrifying. He did confess to killing 8 people, finally, when it was all said and done. And he was sentenced to death for the 5 Gainesville murders in 1994, and he was executed by lethal injection in 2006. So,
did not ever apologize to the family behind the screen for his actions. Instead, he's saying a hymn to himself.
Right. Because again, he was diagnosed with like sociopathic tendencies, like what is that? Personality disorder, that all serial killers have, that I'm totally blanking on, and it's not in my notes. And personality disorder. But in his trial, it came up that he was deeply abused. Not saying, again, this is, abused people don't become serial killers, but a lot of serial killers have been abused. He was born in Shreveport, Louisiana. His father was a Shreveport police officer named James Rawlings, who told Danny that he was abused and beaten by him. So was his mother, Claudia, and his brother, Kevin. His mom was in the hospital many times with domestic abuse issues. She repeated to leave him, but she always came back. And he would handcuff him, have him be arrested for a night, saying that he was embarrassed of him. Real good stuff.
And all this coming from an abusive cop, an officer, someone that his son could have perhaps looked up to, but
Yeah, exactly. So as a teenager and young adult, he was arrested several times for robberies in Georgia, and he was also caught spying on women getting dressed. He couldn't hold down a steady job, and he worked as a waiter and just was, like a pretty gigantic loser.
He was also, he joined the service. When worse came to worse and all hell was breaking loose, he said, you know what, I'm just going to join the service, from which he was later discharged for his mental health issues.
Yes. So now we're going to switch over, as we do, to the 5 students. 1 student was from Santa Fe College and 4 from the University of Florida. So we're going to kind of do a bit of a timeline of what happened. So this all happened within 3 days, which I think is what, Kevin Williamson did use, how quickly people were killed in Scream. I think it was at a high school. It wasn't a college, because I think Scream 2 was at the college. So it was at the high school.
Okay.
Yeah. So first 2 victims, Sonia Larson and Christy Powell, they were new students at the University of Florida in 1990. Christy Powell was extremely excited to be moving into the next phase of her life. Sonia Larson was known as a sweet girl, reserved. She liked working with children, and they both had met each other during the summer and decided they wanted to be. Ultimately found an apartment off campus in a complex called Williamsburg Apartments. Now, Sonia Larson's mom was not very happy that she was living off campus, but unfortunately, the dormitories were all full. And they moved in, and then the families could not reach them for days. So they started getting really installed, but they hadn't called either. And finally, the Powells, they lived closer, went over there. And on August 26, 1990, Powell's parents arrived at the apartment and banged on the door, but they didn't get a response. And so they asked the maid, go ahead.
I was just gonna to back up a little. She was really excited. Powell was to attend the school, and in fact, her father, University of Florida mascot necklace, and so they go over. They make sure that she's settled okay and everything's fine. And what actually leads to all this is her saying, "I'll call you guys tomorrow." She apparently kept in good touch with her parents. They never hear from her. And then, as you were just saying, when they do go visit and they're knocking on their apartment door, there are tons of stickies, like sticky notes, because that's, hey, stop by, there's a party later.
Oh.
So that they saw those notes and got really worried, and that's when they start like vigorously knocking on the door.
Knocking the door. And so when they didn't get a response, they got a maintenance worker, and the maintenance worker also called the police to accompany him as well. So the worker broke down the door, and a police officer was right behind him, followed him into the apartment. They saw first there was a quote that I found when he went in. This is a quote from Betty Kernut, who was the manager of the apartment complex, and she was there at the same time that the bodies were found. Quote, "When he went in, I followed him in the apartment and I saw the young lady on the bed. You could see she was in a bad position. I just turned," Kernut said. Quote, "My maintenance man unfortunately ran down the stairs screaming, 'Oh my God,' and threw up. And unfortunately, the parents were right behind them." So they found Christy Powell dead on the first floor of the apartment. She had been raped and stabbed multiple times and had been mutilated. Sonia Larson's body was found on her waterbed on the second floor with stab wounds in her arm and torso.
Were naked and put into uncompromising, really lewd positions.
Yes, with her, one of the victims' hair was fanned out, and she was on her back, feet on the floor.
And eventually, they would notice that both victims were duct taped around their wrists and mouth, but then there was, it appeared as though the duct tape. But there was remnants of the duct tape around their wrists.
Yes, and there was also soap on one of the women's bodies.
Yeah.
As well. Now,
Powell's, yeah.
Yes. Now they had he had used the screwdriver to essentially wedge into the door jamb to break open the door, and that was kind of one of his I want to say kind of signatures.
Also interesting to note was that when he first enters their apartment, he sees Powell is asleep. And so he goes to Sonia's room. They're both asleep. But he goes to Sonia's room and for whatever reason makes a decision not to sexually assault her, just kill her, and then goes back to a sleeping and sexually assaults her. So not, he assaults one, but not the other.
Yes, exactly. And so the police were very worried that that the suspect would commit more murders. And unfortunately, another murder happened the next day. Her name was Krista Hoyt, and she was an aspiring police officer who had been working part-time at the Alachua County Sheriff's Office. Yes?
I beg your pardon. This actually occurred 12 hours prior to Powell and Sonia.
Oh, so she died before, but they found her the next day.
Correct.
Okay.
Which is eerier, which makes the whole matter really earlier. Like, eerie. He starts with Hoyt, and then 12 hours later, he's doing it again.
Right, exactly. So, I mean, went into a full-on frenzy. So, yeah, she didn't show up for work on August 26, 1990. And so they dispatched Barbara and another officer to her home, and she was also found raped, stabbed to death, mutilated, and beheaded. Now, later, he had said that he had come back to Krista's home because he thought he had dropped his wallet. And that was when he beheaded her, which is a monster like
Monster.
many. And I
And
can
once again, duct tape. Same MO. Exact
same MO. Yeah.
Yeah.
So she was the third victim. Well, I guess the first victim, but now this is three victims within 20 hours. And then the morning after that, so on the third day, on August 28th, 1990, Pauls and Manny Taboada were found dead. They were 23, both of them, and had been close friends since high school and had just begun living together. Manny Taboada wanted to be an architect, and Tracy wanted to be a lawyer. So what the police believe happened was that Manny attacked first. So the killer broke into the home and he fought with Manny.
And if I may, I got to jump in here.
Yes, please.
In that, Tracy's pal Lisa says that she had heard what was going on. She went to another school and called Tracy and said, "Hey, are you okay? Are you keeping safe?"
Mm-hmm.
Tracy said, "Yeah, I'm fine. You know what? I got Manny here. Like, Manny's totally going to protect me."
Right.
And that was to what happened there.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, exactly. Because again, as a woman, you think, well, if I have a man in the house, I'm going to be totally fine. And
he was quite fit too. He was a really large dude.
Yeah. So, I mean, well, I wonder, like in that, because he's obviously in a frenzy at this point, like, how you can have the superhuman adrenaline going. But in any case, so Manuel was killed first. And then Tracy Pauls went and to see if he was okay, saw what was happening, ran to her bedroom, tried to close the door. Unfortunately, Danny kicked the door open and she was found in their living room. And again, it was the same MO. She had been raped. She was posed. She had soap on her lower body and on her wrists and mouth. And he had obviously taken the tape again. So of course the police are looking for him, hasn't found him. There's concerned parents all of a sudden pulling kids out of schools. This was at the, beginning of the school year. So it of course sparked national media attention. And they thought that because of the MO, it was the same guy. So the all of the homes of these victims were essentially a budding wooded area, which is why I hate the freaking woods. And all of the back doors were broken into. So he went through the back door. It was near a wood. And one of those details was important because on the day of Krista Hoyt's murder, the police had also responded to a robbery at a bank, which was a half a mile away from her home. And during the robbery, one of the tellers had slipped a red dye pack into the bag of money, which then, of course, exploded. And later that night, an officer noticed a man walking into a wooded area. And campsite that, unfortunately, they did not find the suspect, who was Danny Rawling, there at the time. But what they did find was a duffel bag that had a screwdriver, a bag of money, which was defaced by the dye, and a cassette player with a tape inside. But the police didn't realize the evidence they had. And so they stored it. And they didn't connect the bank robbery to the student murders because a gun was found at the campsite and the murders didn't involve a gun. And they obviously didn't find a knife. So they didn't actually listen to the tape until months later. But it proved to be a crucial point in this whole case. But
amongst the evidence was that they found was the screwdriver.
Yeah. The screwdriver that had been pried, but they
I didn't know. Yeah, they didn't connect it at that time.
And they actually already had a suspect by the name of Ed Humphrey,
Yes.
who was being questioned. And the DNA testing wasn't that great, but
he was a blood type A, and the blood at the scene was B.
Right, which that was one of the reasons why they let him go. But he was in police custody. But then all of a sudden, there was a phone call by a woman named, looking for her name right now, Cindy Jurakic, who was on a trip through the Florida Panhandle in August 1990, and she heard this news report about a grisly string of murders, and it made her think of a man from her Louisiana hometown church who used to spend time with her and her family. And I was like, oh my God, like how would you hang out with a serial killer? And the whole thing was kind of, there had been a family that was murdered in 1989 in Shreveport. And the police believed it was Rawling. And there was, I guess, no proof. And then he told her ex-husband, her then husband, Stephen Dobbin, that he liked sticking people with a knife. Her then husband was like, yeah, you got to go. He liked to stick knives into people, was the exact quote.
Yeah.
And
the family that was murdered was a grandfather,
his daughter and his
8-year-old, and the aunt.
And his daughter. Yeah.
The mother was not, Sean's mother, the boy's mother, was not there, because the idea was that Sean was going to stay at his grandfather Tom's for the weekend or whatever. No, we'll bring him back Monday, and just never heard from him. Called his school, never heard. And so, however, while everyone was stabbed, the aunt, forgive me, I'm just blanking on her name here, but the aunt was the same way. Years later, those victims were found. She was naked. She was in a lewd position.
Yes.
Also had duct tape that was on and then removed.
Yeah, so it was Julie Grissom. So it was the Grissoms. So
right,
it was
the Grissom family. Yeah.
November 4th, 1989. And it was William Grissom, 55, 24-year-old daughter Julie Grissom, and 8-year-old grandson Sean Grissom. And again, she had also the tape residue on her, left in a similar position as the other women, but her body had been rinsed with vinegar rather than to try to clean the body. But she said, the caller, when she called Crime Stoppers, she said, you need to look into Danny Rawling. And that was, obviously a huge break in the case. And, it's interesting because I always think like they must of when a serial killer is striking about information. And to think that this time around, they actually were smart enough to actually investigate Danny Rawling. Like they took her not as a crank. They investigated the murders, thought it dirty, and then started investigating Danny.
Yeah. And it's interesting how in their investigation, these robberies, he's like spending most of the 80s behind bars.
Yeah.
And he leaves a trail. And what's interesting to note is how much of this case starts to affect society. I mean, this really blew up on the media, and the police wanted it to go to the media so everyone in the area can. Yeah, so it's really interesting about this. What's really interesting about this case is just once again how the media became such a big source of this news. The police actually wanted, after the fifth victim being Manuel, to get it out into the news. So literally the next day, it more or less becomes a national story. Mm-hmm. Guard was brought in, and there were tons of helicopters. Like they really, really were on a manhunt. Everyone, University of Florida was in lockdown. As we said earlier, hundreds of students start leaving the university. So it just had an absolutely huge effect on everyone. And I guess also the fact that they all happened so quick within a short amount of time.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. The police started investigating Danny Rawlings. They actually found out that 3 months before the Gainesville murders in May 1990, Danny Rawlings and his father had an argument, and Rawlings' father chased him out of the house at gunpoint. And so Danny Rawlings came back with his own gun and shot his father in the face. And it was a small caliber gun. The father survived, but without permanent damage. But then 3 months later, he goes on to a killing spree. And they finally listened to the tape, and the tape contained recordings of a man talking and singing. He sings that he's a killer, a drifter, and gone insane. He talks about his family and how he went down the wrong road. And he talks about killing a deer. And then at one point, he says his name, Danny Harold Rawling, which meant that they now had him for the bank robbery, had the screwdriver that had been used to open up the homes. Now, when they went searching for him, he had already been detained 40 miles south of Gainesville in Marion County Jail because he had committed another robbery at a supermarket 10 days after Paul's and Manny Tabota's bodies were found. And they found that he had type B blood and was on November 15th, 1991, he was charged with 5 counts of first-degree murder in connection to the college students' deaths, and he faced the death penalty. And then he was also convicted on federal bank robbery charges, and he was sent to Florida State Prison. And he, of course, in jail, talked supposedly with another inmate who was on death row for killing a drug dealer in the 70s. And he detailed all of the murders. And he also said he wanted to confess. So Bobby Lewis wrote a 5-page letter outlining the details that Hewitt had said. And it was ones that only the killer knew, which were his exact movements in the houses that had happened with his victims. And he, on his trial...
He sang, remember, to his fiance.
Yeah, that's right. Because there's a book came out about him that they got very close. He claimed that he had split personality disorder, and that first he was named Yanad, which was Danny spelled backward. Yanad was a bad person, but not evil. But that the second person he had inside of him was a personality called Gemini. And he claimed that Gemini had done the worst killing. But of course, that was like, oh, the devil made me do it. And it was around the time that The Exorcist 3 had come out. And he had been known to actually was one of the things in The Exorcist 3, speaking of horror films.
Well, it's interesting to know Exorcist 3 makes me think of Jeffrey Dahmer, who also enjoyed that film. And also, there were times when, what a movie club, huh? And then there were times when he referenced other serial killers, Ted Bundy being one of them, that he numbers and was in a way inspired by them. So, yeah, the other thing that's interesting, going back to the effect it had on Gainesville, there were tons of sales within a week for baseball bats, knives, guns, just tons of self-defense happening and being scooped up by the town, which you got to understand how this really affected a place where this sort of thing just really never happens. Gainesville, those have an underbelly, but it's not near the colleges. So this is just highly unusual and absolutely terrifying.
Yeah.
For one who's there. And these, the first 3 murders occur within 24 to 48 hours. So the cops are trying frantically they can, but they don't want to release the intimate details or information, right? Because they don't want the killer to find out how much they know. And incidentally, it was police eventually used what they call a violent crime prevention program, which was new to tracking down killers and whatnot. It was a huge, extensive database where any law enforcement agency could just, and this was like one of the first databases where like their records would come up and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And so thanks to that, a lot of the information on Rolling appeared and came up, and they're like, okay,
Yeah,
you know,
he's definitely our guy. And so again, he was tried and he was convicted, found guilty. And like we said, he actually did die in 1997 for these killings. But you know, the story itself, how quickly it came to be, I could totally see where Scream kind of came from that, which, you know, a lot of bodies dropping in a very small amount of time. The media attention, because there was, you know, that whole media portion of it as well. You can kind of see not shadows, but like the echoes of that crime in Scream.
The pacing matches the intensity of the pacing of what's happening in real life, I feel too.
Yeah. And it's again that whole idea that horror films have about co-eds, right? Like you have a bunch of young, pretty people in a very small space. And you know, it's perfect for kind of like a like how do you want to say it? The fishing bowl. So which kind of is always the thing that happens in horror films as well, right? You have like the college campuses or the sororities or things like that.
He also told Cindy at one point, yeah, I want to head down to Gainesville, you know, University of Florida. They have like the cute girls there I can watch.
Right.
And then it's creepy just to know that he was in a tent in the forest in the back of the university housing.
Yeah. I know. It's just, I mean, the whole thing is
creepy as hell.
Creepy as hell. And the guy was a monster and gross, and happy he's not walking amongst us on this planet. But then we can now go on to the next two creepers who saw Scream, thought it was absolutely amazing, and decided to essentially to do the same thing to get some notoriety. And of course, again, going back to that quote that Kevin Williamson made for the entire movie, that the movies just make killers more creative. They don't create the killer. And I find it interesting for this. So we're talking about the case of Cassie Jo Stoddart, who was a 16-year-old who was murdered by her class Tory, Adamczyk, and Brian Draper on September 22nd, 2006. Now, when you look these guys up, they are literally children. Like it's 16 going on 12. And, you know, it's when I was reading through this case, they had a kill list for a bunch of their classmates. And I kind of wonder if they decided like it was from the Scream movie, but they seem kind of like the shooters. Like
this is what I was thinking. This is the closest we could come to a taste of what it might have been like to interrogate and convict the Columbine shooters. Had they not killed themselves? I just got that same feeling like, oh,
yeah, like they have the
same ideas
to, you know, be relevant
outcasts
and have, you know, have notoriety. And so even that they used Scream as like, hey, we should do this, it like it felt to me like a more of a, we're not dealing with like kind of your typical serial killer sociopath. It was more of like, oh, we're dealing without the guns, and they just got caught on the first victim because they decided to use a knife.
Yeah.
And videotape it because they were going to make a horror film. So it's like
they made a whole video diary, and their plan was, yes, they were working on a horror movie. They actually asked the victim if she was going to be in it, and she agreed. And you know, they're both their favorite films, and they were avid horror fans. However, they were both into the victim. They both had crushes on the victim. And in the case, we learned that their friend Matt, well, not necessarily Tory's friend, but Matt winds up being the boy who starts dating the victim.
Oh, so okay. And because he was there the night that she was killed,
Oh,
was
yeah.
that she was house
House,
sitting
yeah,
for her aunt and uncle. And she invited her boyfriend, Matt Beckham, to join her at the house. And he invited Tory Adamczyk, and then he brought along Brian Draper. And they were keeping a death list, but nobody knew this until after Cassie was. They hung out at that house for a couple hours.
yeah,
And Draper had unlocked the basement door so that he and Adamczyk could sneak back in later that same evening. And then they left, and then they parked down the street, put on dark clothing, gloves, and masks, and they snuck back into the residence through the basement door while Matt and Cassie were watching TV. Now, Cassie was trying to get Matt to stay over, but absolutely not, but you can come here. But she was like, no, I feel guilty. I promised my aunt and uncle I'd be watching this house. And so she stayed behind. And they located the circuit breaker in the house. They turned off all the power in her house, and came upstairs and uh let's see. They had a dagger and then a hunting type knife.
yeah,
And supposedly they tried to frighten her, but she didn't get frightened. And
yeah,
then she was asleep on the couch. And that's when they attacked. And they approximately stabbed her 30 times, 12 of them, which were fatal.
yeah.
And they fled. And and again, this videotape, I mean, again, these are freaking children.
They're literally filming themselves, however, right after they've committed
Right
this.
after. Like right after.
After you hear Brian say, "I can't believe I did it. I killed someone. Like, oh my god, like
Yeah.
this doesn't feel real." And Thor's like, "Oh my god, dude!" And it's just like they're kids.
And this is on YouTube, by the way, too. So if you look up Murder of Cassie Jo Stoddart, the tape is actually on YouTube that you can watch.
Also, to notice they tried to, along with a lot of evidence, they tried to burn some items, and that was one of the items that they tried to burn and destroy. But when cops showed up and they found a lot of evidence and footprints, they found the tape and they were able to recover everything that was on that tape. So props to technology.
Right, exactly. And of course, because these are kids and they're fucking idiots, being monsters and children, they, of course, were the last people to see her alive. Her boyfriend, Matt. So they were immediately interrogated, like literally the next day. And
it's interesting. Their interrogation is just so interesting to watch. How they just go from they're on the same page telling these lies, and then it just every lie at every turn just starts. It's kind of masterful how the interrogators just get them to break down, you know?
Right, exactly. And of course, I believe it was Brian Draper was the one who cracked, and
Yep.
he led the police to a stash of evidence he'd buried in the Black Rock Canyon area, and that included 2 dagger-style knives, a silver and black-handled knife, and a folding knife, red and white mask, latex tape, which contained the footage. Essentially explicitly planning the murder, and that it also included the footage of them reacting after the murder was done.
Now, Brian at first claimed, "Hey, Tory was the one who stabbed her. I was just there. I dropped the knife. I didn't want to do anything." But he was saying, "She's not dead, bro. She's not dead. You got to do it."
Yeah.
And I didn't want to, so I stabbed her leg. And he was like, "Man, you can't. That's not going to do anything." So that's when he claims he stabbed her chest. He felt a tremendous amount of pressure from Tory. But going back to this sort of bizarre love triangle, which is kind of what it was at the end of the day, Matt didn't ever really get along with Tory, but was buddies with Brian. And both Brian was on the cusp of asking out Cassie, apparently for a couple of years or something like this. Tory really had affection. He really was drawn to Cassie too and wanted to go out with her. So then when Matt comes in, I think this is like what starts that fire, and that just sort of let's kill these people. That's just my guess, but I do sense that there was, through the interrogation videos you watch, there's jealousy. I mean, Tory even admits that, he's all right. I just don't like him,
Right. Yeah, no. So, I mean, yeah, I don't even know what to say, because it's
it's just so gross. And so yeah, I mean, ultimately they're right. Both of them get one count of first degree murder, as well as Tory gets conspiracy, but not.
Well, my research was that Brian Draper was found first degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder on April 17, 2007. And then Tory Adamczyk was convicted of the same charges on June 8th, 2007. So they were both convicted of first degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder, because again, on that tape, they showed was the conspiracy.
I was under the impression that Brian, they found out, wasn't involved in the conspiracy, and that it all came from Tory. So he got the added 30 years to life without parole.
Yeah.
I may be wrong here.
Yeah, I found that they both are received life sentences in prison.
I mean, they should.
Possibility for parole. Plus,
the evidence is there
for the conspiracy. Yeah. And they're at the Idaho State Correctional Facility. They have had appeals in 2010, 2011, and both of their appeals were denied. So they're still sitting in jail.
Interesting to note that during the second interrogation of Tory, his parents are in the room. And whenever they're left alone, the father is just like, come on, we're going to love you no matter what. Like, just tell everything that you know. So both kids just consistently lied. They just, it was lie after lie, and the interrogators had so much evidence. And they just sat there knowing that they were fibbing like the entire time. But it was great because then they would repeat their questions and the stories would change, of course.
All right.
But yeah, Ron was the one that said, yeah, this is all Tory. And then Tory is shocked. Look, you can get yourself the attorney you just requested, but we want to let you know Brian just confessed, and he's saying that
it was all you.
Yeah.
Right. So because they're dipshits, they of course turn on each other. And again, it's just with that kill list, it just makes me think it's like, oh, it's just another bunch of losers with this idea of killing their classmates because they want to be known and they want their names out there. So that was the two cases for Scream. And then Scream itself, box office, like it put teen horror films back on the map.
Yeah.
I mean, it's still a hugely popular film. It's a film franchise. And you can still, like, it hailed that whole that I Know What You Did Last Summer. There was the Dawson's Creek. There was like a bunch of those I Know What You Did Last Summer. There's 3 of them with like
young hot actors and actresses.
Yeah, exactly.
But then I also feel like that the rebirth of those slasher films then continues today with but it's like really ultra violent. You have Rob Zombie and some other folks make really like ultra graphic violent slasher films. In other words, like there's always, I feel like it comes in waves, how we go from Last Man on Earth or M, right?
Yeah.
To, Dawn of the Dead. I mean, Night of Living Dead. And then, you start getting these, really our generation got like some of the late 70s, early 80s slasher films when there were still big box office hits.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember watching Nightmare on Elm Street when I was 10 in 1985. It was 1985 that it came out. I remember watching that and being horrified. Like, it was so scary. But again, I didn't see Halloween. I mean, I remember seeing Jason, but I didn't see. And Halloween is one of my that on, like, I'll be watching it this weekend. I watch it every Halloween. because I feel like it's the original one, which is like it's
Yeah.
so classic and scary.
For me, it's one of the earliest horror films I remember seeing was at a really stupid early age, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and
Oh,
then
that's a crazy one. That's such an
yeah,
interesting film
it's
song because it's not that bloody. Like most
right.
people don't realize that there isn't that kind of
There's some gore, but it's not like
it's
not on
not
the quick.
it's the anticipation of and the horror of like Leatherface. It's
Yes,
kind of fascinating to watch because I remember seeing Saw for the first time, and Saw also is not that gory. Like
right.
I think most people 2, 3, 4, and 5 are all about the torture porn, but the first one wasn't. It was like the psychological horror in a box, essentially.
It's interesting because it's interesting how audiences can take what they see right in a movie and just kind of interpret like all the things that weren't there, but like may have been, in their eyes,
Yeah,
like this sort of thing happened. And
yeah.
then like The Omen and The Exorcist. To me, your Halloween is my Exorcist. Like I'll
So
watch
have
every.
you heard The Exorcist 3? Like, have you watched The Exorcist 3? I have a very like this woman who I absolutely love her taste in film, and she said that The Exorcist 3 scared her more than any movie has ever scared her before.
Whoa,
And I don't think I remember watching The Exorcist 3. For me, that's I don't know if you saw the Changeling. Remember that ghost
of
film from
course,
1981?
yes,
That
that's frightening stuff.
scares the crap. If any of you have not seen
Ooh.
Changeling, go watch The Changeling this weekend. It's such a fantastic
And the
ghost
original one,
horror.
because I think they remade it. Unfortunately, I
Oh,
think
really? Yeah, find the original
the
one from I think
original
it's
one
like
is so good.
1979 or
Yeah,
1981. It is
yeah,
so good and so creepy that like your
yeah,
house is gonna be just a nightmare. And
yeah,
just like every creak, you're like, oh my God, what is it?
yeah,
It's so
yeah,
scary. So yeah,
yeah.
so you're what are you going to be watching this weekend? Are you going to have any
Well, it's
Halloween?
funny. Well, yeah, because it's funny because I did start Exorcist 3 actually. George C. Scott's in it.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, this is fun. And like prior to that, so I rewatched the first one, which I
Mhm.
just blows my mind. And then I watched the second one,
Which is
which
supposed to be kind of a
I don't
joke.
remember. She's like a little older
Yeah,
now,
yeah.
you know. One is an interesting start, but I don't know. Like I feel like there's so much to watch on Halloween that I'll probably watch The Exorcist 3. Or what's
I'm
really
gonna
interesting is
go ahead.
Tarantino.
Uh,
Tarantino considers Psycho 2 better than the first Psycho.
oh, that's interesting. Well, because Psycho 1, it's kind of like The Shining. I didn't see
Yes.
Shining until 2000, but that at that point, every horror movie had already borrowed all of those images from that film. So it's almost like too meta for somebody watching The Shining for the first time because you're
Uh,
like, oh, I've seen this. Oh, I've seen this. Oh, I've seen the video that uses the twins as this. So
right.
it becomes like you can't have that experience of watching it for the first time
Right.
because it's cats and like the
Yeah.
jokes and the memes and everything like that. Or, hey, I'm Jack, like him
Yeah.
going through the door. And like it doesn't have that same
Yeah.
punch
I
as
could
it
watch that again though. I love
The Shining.
Shining. I really do. I've always
Yeah.
been curious to see the 1997 version that Stephen King got behind and was like, this is how I really wanted the movie to go. Did you ever see that one?
I oh
I think it might have been made for TV even.
oh yeah. I haven't. I think for this weekend I'm gonna try to watch The
But
Exorcist 3 and then do my
good.
typical Halloween.
Yeah,
Because Jamie Lee Curtis is my girl. She's like the one who created The Last Girl Standing. Like she's just
absolutely.
iconic. I absolutely
Iconic.
love
Yeah,
everything she does. So
yeah,
I was
yeah,
so happy that she finally won the Oscar for doing because I'm a genre girl totally. Like
yeah,
I just that's my jam.
yeah. I mean, she's broken her ass like so long. She's been in think of her career. She's been in so many movies. I was just so excited also that she finally got it. But Halloween, I mean, she also plays it well. See, that's the funny thing is in a lot of these horror movies, I think we forget how good the acting is. For
Yeah.
real. Like Anthony Perkins kills Psycho. Like he's just so.
Oh my God. Yeah.
I mean, Jamie Lee
Oh my God.
Curtis is amazing. Like you believe her. Like it's
Yeah.
not.
Yeah.
You know.
And then Anthony Perkins, like I still love Psycho because of, I don't love the ending because it's so obvious, but
Yeah.
I love the idea of the they took a lot from Ed Gein, right? And like the whole is
Yeah.
every serial killer had a mother who shamed him. So
Yeah.
you know, it's like that perfect combination of really bad brain chemistry abuse and then a mother who is abusing you, and you're just like, oh my God. Um, and so I thought that that was so interesting for him to put that into that movie. So even though he was a creeper as well, oh my God, just the stories
Yeah.
that have come out is
Boy. We'll have to, well, you know, maybe one day. But also the interesting thing is it's like now there's such an influx of horror, right? That it's hard for, like, a lot of it looks really good and I can never decide what to watch. So then I just jump back to the classics. Like I'll watch The Omen. You know what I mean? Like I'll just watch
yeah,
the
which
ones
is like
that
the creepy kid.
I know.
I mean,
Yeah.
again, I'm pretty much convinced that like my first movie, a Christmas romance or a horror film, because it's so easy to like break in with a horror film because of the fact that, you know, it's cheap and easy. And if you can do it really well, there's so much money in it because people love to be scared.
Yes.
Or be.
It's also a great springboard. You know, if you do a great horror film, then you can jump into the films that you really want to do. That's what's so cool.
Right,
you know?
exactly. Which I mean, my favorite. So I'm like definitely in the like sci-fi.
Oh my God.
Yeah,
How great is Blade Runner?
Oh, seen it 200 times. But anyway, thank you.
Wait. I have to point something out because if anyone's listening, okay, so the way that Daryl Hannah dies in Blade Runner, it's replicated. She does the exact same death scene in Kill Bill.
Oh, with the
glass and like spazzing out.
I'm gonna have to recheck that again. Because I've only seen Kill Bill once. So, that's
it's a nice little Easter egg. But yeah, happy Halloween, folks!
Happy Halloween, everybody! And
Scream, Bay. So next time you folks watch Scream, now you know.
Now you know where it all comes from. And again, if you want to watch some creepy children be murderous fucks on YouTube, because again, YouTube has
so disturbing
all the horrors, and apparently it has the horror of these boys talking about killing their friend who they had a crush on. So it was probably this whole incel thing again, which again, like it's because they actually mentioned Diebold and Klebold and whichever. I think I'm getting their names wrong. The Columbine people, they actually do. Again, just a bunch of creepers with no imagination, killing a girl 100%. That they really liked and instead dated somebody else.
I mean, really, those Columbine guys also made their own movies, right?
Of course.
They're walking around. And,
because they wanted to be relevant. They wanted to be somebody because deep inside they knew they were nobody.
Yeah.
But that's like the incel thing too, right? Like the incels think like everybody, they deserve to be known because they're just gods walking. Times 100.
Yeah.
Good times. Anyway, happy Halloween, everybody.
Happy Halloween. Trick or treat.
Hang out with witches and goblins and monsters and not lame
apples with razors in them.
Yeah, exactly. Watch your candy. All right. Bye, everybody. This episode was sponsored by The Creek Killer, book 1 in the Harriet Harper thriller series written by me, Dominika Best. What would you do if you read the police found your body in a creek? Find out in The Creek Killer, available on Amazon. Thank you for joining me and listening to this episode. If you like my show, please give me a rating and review. It helps other listeners find this podcast. Follow Dominika Best Presents The Deviant Mind wherever you listen to your podcasts. Visit thebeststorytellingnetwork.com, where you'll find show notes, my books, links to social media, and much more. Join my Patreon for special subscriber perks, like 2 extra exclusive episodes a month and a Q&A with me at patreon.com/The Deviant Mind Podcast. Until next time.